Okay, so it's just the
So this one's the live, and then this one's our Zoom people.
How many we got?
A little over 20 people so far, and then there's going to be people in Facebook and LinkedIn, and all over. Be a good turnout.
Is that a printout?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jets, let's take it up another level. More urgency.
Share. All right.
Oh, we got lights.
Yeah, you stop that light there. All right. So just so everybody knows, for this evening, this is actually the, can everybody hear us okay? Can I get a couple head nods out there in the crowd? All right, great. So this is actually the first time that we will be actually doing this family program, and Karl and I have 2 laptops set up over here because we actually are live streaming. Those of you that are on Zoom, none of you are being live streamed. Don't worry about that. No one can see you besides Karl and myself. But we're live streaming this because we do have many family members and loved ones that cannot make it in person and still want to be able to get this information. So it will be available on the Recovery Unplugged social media platforms. And then I want to give a shout out to one of the fine men on our marketing team, digital marketing to be specific, who is behind the scenes on the live stream, making it all happen. And he's got a quick little blurb that he's going to share, and those of you on Zoom should be able to hear it. Let it roll, Greg.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first ever live broadcast of our family programming hosted by Ian Jackson and Karl Bremer. This evening, Ian and Karl will be fielding questions from loved ones who currently have friends or family under our care. The names and details of our participants will remain anonymous. Additionally, we encourage participation from our viewers on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, However, we will be fielding most of the questions this evening from the families. We hope you enjoyed this educational Q&A live stream, and as always, please be compassionate to those involved. Thank you.
So for those of you on Zoom that may not be able to hear that, I will say this. It was a small introduction to the family program. Technology. We love it. So as we get started here, first of all, I just want to thank everybody for taking time out of their day to be here. This is a process that takes a village. We know that from a facility standpoint in all of our departments when we're working with a client, and it takes a full village approach. And not just something that we believe, but statistics do show that when family has a higher level of involvement, family and loved ones have a higher level of involvement, it does give your loved one a higher chance of being able to stay sober. We are fighting against a beast that is very powerful. Addiction is a deadly disease. And we want to do everything that we can to provide you with the tools that you need to be able to make it through this process safely. So, first and foremost, we'll start out with a little introduction. My name is Ian Jackson. I'm the program director with Recovery Unplugged. I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee, at our Nashville location. I've been with Recovery Unplugged now for 7 years. I started out at our Florida facility, which was our first facility that opened back in 2013. That was where it all began, really. That's where the idea came about of utilizing music as a catalyst to engage people, utilizing music as a tool in helping people to be able to stay sober. And I've been working in the addiction and mental health field now this is year number 12. And, it kind of feels like yesterday, the day I got started in this. And addiction is very close to my family. And it's something that I'm extremely passionate about, is being able to help others. And that's enough about me. I'm going to let Karl go ahead and introduce himself.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Karl Bremer. I love to talk about me. So I'll be looking at both screens throughout the evening. I am a licensed professional counselor here in Nashville, Tennessee. I have transitioned into private practice where I work with families, individuals, and couples as they, again, work through the recovery flavors and issues out in the world. And so I have experience with Recovery Unplugged in Texas and Tennessee. I am in personal recovery. August 16th is my sobriety date of 2004. So this year I'm coming up on 18 years sober, and for that I'm very grateful. I'm very passionate about the family program. You will hear me talk at length about how critical it is for you guys to be empowered, educated, heard, validated throughout this evening. So I really look forward to, again, just engaging with you guys and giving you hope, because that can be a very, very powerful drug in itself. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
Absolutely. So before we get started, just so everybody understands the format of how this will run, because we do have so many people here and engaged and involved, I do ask that you guys remain on mute during the call, just because it will be much easier that way to field questions and just for continuity. So for everybody, the best way to ask us a question during this, those of you that are in the Zoom call, would be to utilize the chat function. If you click on the bottom of your screen, there's a little option that says chat. As long as you just click that, you can just type a question in, and we will be fielding that throughout the call. And for those of you out in the social media, metaverse, as they say now today, same deal.
Good turn.
You will be able to ask. Yeah, right. That's good. It's forward thinking there. You will be able to ask questions as well, and they'll be posted up on this screen over here. And Karl and I, our goal tonight is to release every piece of information that we possibly can to help you deal with this process. Do not be scared to ask any question. There's no such thing as a dumb question throughout this, because some families, some of you here, are going through this for the very first time. Some of you are going through this, and you have been through this many times. And we do our best to neutralize the information, to not to be able to include everybody. You may hear some things that don't pertain to your loved one at all, and you're going to hear some things that are exactly, you're going to think to yourself, this call was meant for me. So the first thing I'd like you to do is I'd like you to just think about the biggest question that you have coming into this process and just going through this process, the biggest question that you have. And I know there's many, but I want you to just choose one to start out with, and feel free to throw that in the chat. Those of you on social media, those of you in the Zoom call, feel free to put that in the chat during the first, 5 to 10 minutes of this. I want you to be able to ask as many questions as possible. And as we're going through the list of topics tonight, if we say something that's a little bit unclear, put a question in. I promise you that we will get to every single question that is asked throughout this call. No question will go unheard or unanswered. So
bring it on.
We are
Come
ready
on.
for it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So Recovery Unplugged. Like I said in the beginning, the idea of this came about when, our founders had this idea that music can help to start a conversation, and music can speak when words don't. So we started this journey, and we have served thousands of people throughout the 8 to 9 years that we've been open. I have met thousands of people. I have met so many amazing people through this process. And treatment truly is a process. And I want to discuss a little bit right now of what that process actually looks like, what your loved one's actually doing in these different levels of care. And I think it's important for people to understand what the different levels of care are and what they offer, so that you understand the whole continuum of care. The continuum of care model was built for a reason, is because every statistic will tell you that the longer that your loved one is in treatment, the better chance they have of staying sober. Every statistic will always say that. That doesn't mean that a short stay will mean relapse. I'm just saying that the longer your loved one is in treatment, the higher chance they have of being able to stay sober long term. So let's start out with the first level of care, which would be detox. Detoxification is typically the first level of care in this process, especially for individuals who become chemically dependent on their drug of choice. In the detox level of care, your loved one is getting a lot of medical attention. They're meeting with a medical provider, whether that's an addiction professional psychiatrist or a nurse practitioner every single day, and then also meeting with the therapist every day, and meeting with the nursing staff about every 2 to 4 hours. During that time period, there's a lot of one-on-one attention. The reason that we do daily individual therapy during this level of care, along with the medical piece, is because we want to be able to help to try to engage that person as much as we can early on, to be able to get them bought into the idea of recovery, and to be able to get them bought into the idea of engaging in the treatment process ultimately. So that level of care typically lasts about 5 to 7 days on average, depending on the drug of choice. It could be a little bit longer. And some people experience withdrawal symptoms that last longer than that 5 to 7 days, which is why the next step down would be the residential level of care. The residential level of care is where your loved one's going to start to get more engaged into groups, and a little bit diving deeper with their therapist on underlying issues. Because during the detox process, those things might get discussed, but your loved one is taking medications that are still, to the point where your loved one's not at their best level of stability. So when they step down to the residential level of care, that's when their psychiatric evaluations typically going to happen to see if we need any type of antidepressant or mood stabilizer, any type of medication related to that. So during this process, your loved one is now expected to go to more group sessions. And at the residential level of care at Recovery Unplugged, we offer 6 hours of group. That's including breaks and lunch, 7 days a week. So that's a lot of recovery. It's a lot of therapy. And they're also meeting with their individual therapist 2 to 3 times a week during that level of care. That level of care typically is going to last on average, about 14 to 18 days. And really, that is all, a lot of that is dependent among the medical necessity and what the insurance company is deciding based on the medical symptoms that are presenting themselves at the time. Next level of care down from there would be partial hospitalization program, otherwise known as PHP. You may have heard this phrase from your loved one on the phone or from the therapist and said PHP, partial hospitalization program. Typically, that is a level of care where your loved one is living in housing that is provided by the facility, and your loved one is still going to group therapy for about 6 hours a day, like I said, with breaks and lunch, about 6 days a week. And the only exception for that would be our Virginia facility, in which the PHP program runs 7 days a week. At that level of care, your loved one's starting to do a lot more for themselves. They're taking care of their own area. They're doing some chores, taking care of their living space. Outside of all the therapy they're taking part in, the life skills are starting to come back into play in this level of care. As you notice, as the client steps down from detox, where a lot's being done for them, and we're really just kind of rallying around them and getting them back to a good place of health, to residential, where we're placing a little bit more expectation on the client to show up, participate in group sessions, engage with other members of the community, and then partial hospitalization program, PHP, we're starting to give back some of those life skills, because at the detox and residential level of care, your loved one at Recovery Unplugged is receiving chef cooked meals. The tech staff helps out a lot with the cleaning, even laundry. PHP, that's given back to the client to take care of those things, to be able to take care of their space, and it's just good practice and self-care. The next level of care down from there would be IOP. IOP stands for Intensive Outpatient Program. So this is a true outpatient level of care. At this level of care, your loved one is either back at home or potentially in a sober living, taking part in group therapy anywhere from 3 to 5 times a week for only 3 hours a day, and still meeting with their therapist one-on-one. There's still the psychiatric help there, not as frequent, because typically by then medications are usually stabilized. And then this is the level of care where the person is starting to transition back into their life. Some people, when they're taking part in the IOP, especially when they relocate to a new location, or they're in an area that they weren't living before, this is typically when they're about to probably start getting a job, taking on more responsibilities again. And this is really that level of care where we start to see recovery truly grow. A common phrase in this setting is that in treatment is when discovery happens, is when you're learning about yourself, learning about who you are, and then the recovery begins to take place after treatment, where you're building a life. Now you're building reasons to not go back to the way that life was before. Like I said in the very beginning, the continuum of care is built a certain way for a reason. It steps a client down slowly from each level of care to a point where they can return back into, and not even just return back into, is to build a life from there. Some clients aren't able to take part in every single level of care due to it not being feasible. We understand that. We want to do our best when it comes to those situations to try to set something up for your loved one that can provide some level of accountability and structure. One of the things that we began last year was we started a virtual intensive outpatient program. And some of you that are logged onto this might have a family member that's in our virtual intensive outpatient program. That is run similar to the IOP level of care that I just said. It's group 3 times a week for 3 hours a day. They meet with their therapist once a week. There's psychiatric services. There's a nurse keeping in contact with your loved one to make sure medications are filled and whatnot. So there's still that level of support. We created that not only because of COVID, because we had so many people returning to rural areas, especially in Tennessee and Texas, and even Virginia, where there wasn't services within 30 to 40 minutes of their house. And these are people that wanted to take part in care and wanted to take part in treatment. So we wanted to be able to offer that resource. So those are the levels of care. Now, the big question a lot of times that comes along with this is then, how do I know when my loved one's ready to leave treatment? So I wish I could sit here and give you a list of like, if you see this, and this, we're ready to go. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. There's a lot that goes into this. Is the biggest piece is we're looking at this person's level of motivation. We're looking at their level of commitment to an aftercare plan. We're looking at their willingness to take part in the suggestions that we're giving them. So throughout this call for the next, hour and 40 minutes, I promise you that you're going to have a very good idea of what it looks like for someone to be ready to enter into recovery, and for them to, whether it be return back home, return back to their residence, their apartment, whatever it may be. That process needs to really unfold. Sometimes you might get a call from your loved one 3 days into treatment, 4 days into treatment, where they say, this isn't for me. I already know how to stay sober. I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. This is a waste of time. Big red flag. Big red flag. The reason I say that is because, do we really think that it's realistic that a person who is just engaging in full-blown active addiction 3 days ago, right? 3, 4, 5, 7 days ago, all they've done during the period of time they were in treatment was essentially maybe detox or stabilize. What's actually changed to where all of a sudden this huge shift happens? If I wish that it was as easy as a person just making up their mind and saying, I'm just not going to use again. I'm not going to do it again. Because I know that many of you on this call have heard your loved ones say that. And they meant it. Trust me, they meant it when they said that. I don't think that they were saying that just to say it. They meant it. But the fact of the matter is how powerful this is. So as we get into these topics, I want you to continue asking questions. I see some people have already put some questions in the chat here. Please put as many questions as you possibly can, because we love to be challenged, and we have tons of information to offer, but we want to tailor it to you, right? We want to tailor this to you. So our information will typically cover what the questions that you do have, but if there's specific things that you came on here for tonight, I want to make sure that you get it. So we're going to go into our first topic, which is boundaries. And I'm going to let Karl take over for a second here.
Good evening, guys. The first thing I want to talk about with boundaries is there's just so many of them. But the question I get more often from families is, how do I know how to support them versus enable them? And that's the biggest thing when it comes to boundaries. Now, there's all kinds of boundaries. There's physical boundaries. There's financial boundaries. There's emotional boundaries. There's recovery boundaries. There's a lot of myriads when it comes to the boundary component. Now, boundaries is what we can call healthy and unhealthy. Is the first place I want to start with. A healthy boundary is when I feel safe, when I feel like I can engage in a relationship with my loved one as they're in early recovery, and I feel safe. I don't feel like I'm doing too much. I'm not solving their problems. If you think that you might be doing too much in their recovery, you already are. And so as professionals, we want to be able to step up and say, we want to empower you to learn how to say no. You can't say yes to everything. And so one of the first ways to know, am I doing too much, is how often do I say yes? How much am I stepping in the gap to solve problems? We have case managers, therapists, and a treatment team that's helping your loved one take responsibility for their life, for their recovery, and to change it. And so that's a difficult process. So when it comes to the family component, I really just want you to ask yourself, if it starts to feel uncomfortable, like I'm doing too much, you are. And to get in touch with the professionals and set up a family session where we can really, again, educate you. In addition to this show, we can do personal sessions with the families and the clients, with or without the client present, to, again, let you ask the questions that are tough, but also for us to, we can kind of customize some of the family issues that you may be struggling with.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of questions, let's go ahead and hit our first question here.
Okay.
Which popped up on both screens here, which is, can you clarify enabling versus helping my loved one?
Yes. Enabling is that component where I problem solve for my drug addict, my person who's struggling in addiction, where I'm the escape hatch as an enabler. When I got sober back in 2004, my primary enabler was my wife, as she protected me from consequences, as when I made promises to do better and I manipulated her, she would co-sign my behaviors. And it became a place where I knew I could manipulate her. And when you're being manipulated, you are enabling. That's one of the biggest red flags of, I think I just got played. You're one of the enablers. And your motive may have been to be just helpful, but now the drug addict or the new recovery person has dragged you into their drama. When I'm helping my loved one is when I can step back, because guys, as family members, we get too close and we're emotional. The emotions skew our ability to have good logic around decision-making process. So helping my loved one is I can step back, look at the situation, go to some people I trust and say, here's what's being presented to me. Run it by the treatment team, run it by people you love, gather the data, look at it from a logical standpoint, and then pull the trigger on a decision. That way you're not skewed by the emotions and the drama of the situation. Nothing should be that urgent where you can't step back and say, I need time to process and decide how I want to respond. If they're pushing, that's a red flag. Everything's got time to be processed in a normal timetable.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that it is such a fine line between, helping and enabling, right? Because, financially speaking, I know that sometimes there's some of you here on this call that you were in a situation where you're like, well, if I just help them with this one, it'll make, if I help them with the rent, then they'll be able to focus on this. Or if I take care of this for them, then they'll be able to do that. And we tell ourselves these things to create comfort within us, right? When I tell myself, okay, well, I'm going to do this and I probably shouldn't, but I think it's going to help out with this other thing. Now, once you catch yourself starting to do that, and one disclaimer I want to make is I don't want anyone to take any of this personally, because the fact of the matter is that enabling, it's almost rare for any addict or alcoholic to not have an enabler in their first time trying to get sober. Mm-hmm. It's rare that they don't have one. So, I mean, here's the thing. Some people in the family or in the support system will have very firm boundaries and they're not going to play any games. And then there's going to be some people that have a more difficult time laying down those boundaries. And it's tough. And like when Karl said earlier about how do I know when I'm doing too much, I want to just paint this picture for you real quick. Think about your loved one who potentially in their active addiction or alcoholism, they let go of a lot of their responsibilities, which is pretty typical for this process. They let go of a lot of their responsibilities. Now they're getting sober and you want to help, of course. And so next thing you know, they're in treatment. Let's say they're in treatment and you're like, okay, well, they have to take care of this thing. Let me take care of that and this so they can focus on their treatment. And let me do this. And some of those things you may have to take care of. Maybe it's not feasible for them to do. And then some of the things is very feasible for them to do. And those things that are feasible for them to take care of, I encourage you to let them take care of it. Maybe you need to give a reminder to the therapist and say, hey, listen, I'm just letting you know this payment is 3 months past due. It's gotta be settled, or whatever it may be, or he or she needs to call their lawyer. Like, I've been in contact with the lawyer. I don't want to be enmeshed anymore. Because look at it this way. when you do something for your loved one that they could have done themselves, you're essentially taking away their ability to feel proud of themselves for completing the task. That's not your goal, and nor did you think that going into the situation, but essentially you removed their responsibility. And when you remove their responsibility, they then can't accomplish the task themselves and say, because think about it this way. Think about when you walk into the grocery store with a list, with this huge list, and then you walk through every single aisle, up and down, and you get everything, and you got it all done. It feels good. It feels good to accomplish things. It feels good to accomplish a list. It feels good to accomplish tasks. And I promise you that for your loved ones, for some of your loved ones here who potentially were letting go of a lot of their responsibilities and let a lot of things fall, it feels really, really good for them to get things done when they first start getting sober. It's what I like to call a recovery trigger. It's something that actually triggers in their brain that actually says, like, I like this, and I kind of do this. I like this, and I can do this, and I kind of want to keep feeling this way. I want to keep feeling proud of myself for what I'm doing. And that is something that's a conversation I've had with many families, and it's difficult getting to that point. You can't just, you have to work your way there, right? Just like I say, we have the levels of care. You slowly work your way down. For some of you on this call that maybe you're going through this, like maybe you've been blind up until this moment, you don't really know what you're doing. Now, I want you to be able to have the tools, but then be able to work them in slowly. Because when it comes to boundaries and enabling, if I've been consistently enabling Karl because he can manipulate me so well, I can't, just because I went to this family program, I can't just cut him off now. I can't just go out and then just go full blown tough love on him, go from full enabling to full tough love. You can do that, but it's going to be harsh and there'll be a lot of damage. So it's slowly working your way into setting the boundaries that need to be put in place in order to get to that healthy zone. Because, your loved one has an if you are an enabler on this call, right? And you have enabled. I'm not saying that you are the villain, right? You essentially are the victim, are one of the victims of your loved one's addiction, and they have influenced you to act this way. And you're doing this because you love them. And the hardest part about this process is that, unfortunately, love does not cure addiction.
Oh, you stole my line.
I was going to give you credit before I said it. That's Karl's line, everybody.
It's my favorite line. Another quick thing, I call it 3 C's, is when it comes to boundaries and addiction and enabling. I didn't cause it, I can't control it, and I can't cure it. So those 3 C's are really important. As your loved one is learning about recovery, you're learning about no longer enabling. And so communicate that. Be willing to jump in that space of, like, when you get cornered on a decision, you got a phone call and you're like, I'm not sure what to do. Use that line of, you know what, I'm learning how to really support you, and I need some more time to really work and process through this in order to make the best decision. So guys, give yourself the space to learn. We learn by repetition and experience, and trust the people that you put around you, especially the treatment team, because everything is case by case. Everything that we're sharing with you guys today is applicable in many ways, but everybody's a case by case because we're all human. And so our idea tonight is to, again, paint pictures for you to start to plant some seeds as we had to transition out of boundaries into codependency. Now, got a question?
Somebody asked you to repeat the 3 C's again real quick. I saw that.
I didn't cause it, I can't control it, and I can't cure it. The 3 C's of boundaries, which rolls right into the codependency. In the last 10 years, that's become a term that has really surfaced in treatment centers of what does that mean? Is it all bad? Is it good? Where are there codependency meetings? It's really, codependency, we're finding that in psychology, it's something from birth. When you are born, you're codependent on caregivers. And as we begin to develop through the stages of life, we become dependent on people for different needs in our life. But ultimately, for alcoholics and addicts, what we find is when you remove the drink or drug, one of the biggest underlying issues is around the codependency. We became addicted to people in the process, because being addicted to those people really enabled us to stay in our addiction. When we feel like we control the players, we get to stay on the field of addiction, speaking from an addict standpoint. And so a great book we're going to put into the chat is called Codependent No More. And it is a great resource. You can get on Amazon paperback at a really good cost. And it will begin to really provide information. I found that book to be so validating. As a parent, I have an addiction, or a child who struggles with addiction. And so I call myself what's called a double winner. I have the codependency and the addiction to drugs and alcohol. And so as you start to learn about the codependent model, I want to empower you with go into this with just an open mind of how much does this apply to me? How much can I learn that will, again, help you first? For so long in addiction, you've been held hostage by us addicts. And now it's time for you to step out of the crazy train and into the island of, I want to learn about my defects, how I've enabled, how I've been unhealthy, my codependency. Those are the components we want you to begin to learn about and start to embrace. Again, It's not bad. It's simply who we are. And so I don't want you guys to hear that if you're codependent, you're broke, you're defective, there's something wrong. What was it in my childhood? What happened to me? No, it's about, as people, we crave relationships. And it's what, to degree, I compromise myself or others to stay in relationship that begins to define levels of codependency. Bam.
Beautiful. So, so how that plays out also, because, I always want to piggyback on Karl as he's talking, and my brain's just coming up with these new ideas. And as how that plays out in the relationship with you and your loved one sometimes is your behavior, your emotions almost mimic theirs identically. Whenever they're in distress, you're in distress. And I know, and I mean, I can say it, but anybody on this call, and those of you that have your camera on Zoom, raise your hand if whenever your loved one has called you, you felt nervous or scared, right? Because this dynamic has happened where a lot of times, unfortunately, those phone calls that you oftenly got were related to, I got another flat tire, I got let go at work, or I got in a car accident, or this happened, that happened, I need this money, or blah, 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 or this person did this to me, and I need you to stand up for me, and like all of and then next thing you know, you have this multitude of issues coming at you. And it's tough because maybe it's been a while since you've gotten that phone call where they actually just said, how are you doing? Right? And it's difficult in this dynamic. Your emotions in are basically reliant upon how your loved one is at that very moment. And how your loved one is, and they know this. They know this. I've worked with many people who have had a prime enabler who is also codependent. And they're happy when their loved one's happy. They're sad when their loved one's sad. They're angry when their loved one's angry. And it's a very difficult dynamic. And to kind of not close out this enabling topic, because I imagine it'll come up again at some point here, is if you are in a situation where you are enabling your loved one, I promise you that your loved one is fully aware of that. And they're kind of in this mindset where they know it's going to stop one day, most likely, and they know that's going to be a rough, rocky road, but their active addiction or alcoholism is going to tell them to ride that train all the way to the end. Even though deep in their heart and soul, they don't want to hurt you. Because when it really comes down to it, this great depiction of recovery was painted by this person I was talking to at one point about 10 years ago, and he said that good recovery is when my actions and my intentions are completely parallel. And when they are on this parallel road, what lives between my actions and my intentions is fulfillment. And fulfillment is this feeling that it's different than happiness. Happiness is a short-term emotion, right? Something happens in my life, makes me happy, but it goes away pretty quickly. Fulfillment is a state of mind that I have these goals, right? My intentions. I have these goals in mind, and then I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to do to work towards those goals. They're moving in the same direction. Feel goals good, right? And the thing is that in between that space lives all that fulfillment. But when my intentions are here, right? I love my family. I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to keep using. But then boom, 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 my actions are so all over the place. I open up all this room for shame, guilt, and all this negativity to come in. And that's where you see, and I know how painful it is to watch your loved one suffer. And sometimes when you get those phone calls and they're suffering, it's hard to not want to jump in and fix it and help, right? What we're trying to teach your loved ones in treatment throughout the levels of care is how to rely on other people, not just their family. I'll tell you this, many times when I've worked with clients and I say, who's your support system? And, they're just like, my family. And I was like, okay, well, who were you living with before you got here? My family. Okay. All right. Now, I'm not here to say that you are the problem. That is not what I'm saying. But when we look at it, what we want to do is we want to help your loved one expand their team. You're always going to be on their team, but I want you to be able to be mom. I want you to be able to be dad. I want you to be able to be husband, wife, cousin, brother, son, daughter, whatever your dynamic is. Those of you that are logged in tonight, that's what I want you to be able to be. I don't want you to be probation officer. I don't want you to be lawyer. I don't want you to be savior.
Case manager.
I don't want you to be case manager. I don't want you to be those things anymore. I want you to just be family, to just be the loved one. And that dynamic is created by your loved one branching out and finding another support system. That's how that dynamic happens. Go ahead, Karl.
One of the best movies I've seen that really depicts this in a way that I think is plausible and realistic is Beautiful Boy with Steve Carell. Is one of the most amazing movies around this, where it allows the family. You are watching this family struggle with boundaries, codependency, enabling, all of these components in this movie. And so please, 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 if you feel like you're even in the area code of codependency and boundary issues, please watch that movie.
And I just posted another movie in the chat because here's the thing. There's a lot of good resources out there. And there's some movies that have some really great depictions of how an addiction impacts a family. There's another one called 4 Good Days. It's a really, really good story about a mother who's trying to help her daughter who's going through addiction. And there's ups and downs, throughout that process. So it's a really good story.
Okay. Now, for alcoholic addicts, we go to 12-step meetings, AA, NA. All those are 12-step meetings, what we call community-based type recovery. In addition to Recovery Unplugged, we have a Recovery Unplugged alumni meetings as well that keeps people connected, because there's a lot to be said around how to stay connected into community to get better. But for the families, there's what we call Al-Anon meetings. If you will go and you will just Google Al-Anon meetings near me, those are a place where you can begin to go and understand the lingo of recovery. Now, evidence-based treatment has also shown us that if you will be involved with Al-Anon, get a sponsor, begin to work steps, it can increase the success rate of your loved one about 30%. simply by attending and participating in the Al-Anon meetings. So that's, I mean, guys, we will take any kind of opportunity that helps our loved one gets better. If it's 1%, I would encourage it. But if we can get 30%, please consider attending Al-Anon. Now, my only disclaimer to that is being here in Nashville, there's hot chicken all over this town, y'all. There's good hot chicken. There's bad hot chicken. Al-Anon can kind of be like hot chicken. So don't go to one meeting and say, well, that wasn't helpful, and give up. Keep looking, because there's many, many different Al-Anon meetings. And one thing that COVID provided for us was online meetings now. So many Al-Anon has shifted to where you could go to an Al-Anon meeting just sitting in your living room. I like for people to go and be part of in-person recovery. That's just kind of how, again, I'd like to promote that, because I think there's a lot to be said around relationship building. It's harder to do that online programs. Mm-hmm. But definitely say, well, Karl, you know, what about codependency? There's actually codependency meetings as well that are very, very common and very, very helpful. So guys, even when I was in early recovery, my wife was like, you're going to AA meetings all the time. Like, help me understand a little bit of this. I hear you talk about it. And I said, you know what? Why don't you come? And if you come to my meeting, you'll hear my whole story without me even talking. And she was like, okay. And sure enough, she really enjoyed it. And so there are open meetings where you can go with your loved one. Not all the time, but every now and then would be great. And invite them to an Al-Anon meeting. Mm-hmm. I've been to Al-Anon with people who I love who struggle with addiction. So guys, it's a community. It takes a village, yes, to get someone sober. But I just want you to know there's multiple resources available on many, many levels. So please reach out and ask for help, and we will direct you to those sources.
Absolutely. And just a second on what Karl said, because as many of our clients try to engage in a program of recovery, whether they're going to 12-step meetings, Smart Recovery, Celebrate Recovery, one of the many different support groups that is out there, there's going to be times where they go in and they have a negative experience, and they don't like it, and they say, well, that's not for me. I promise you that may happen to you too. That may happen to you as well. You may walk into one of those meetings and somebody's going to say something to you that you don't like, or you're going to tell a little bit of your story, and somebody might say, hey, well, you need to stop enabling. You need to do this. You need to do that. And you may not like that, but here's the thing. I promise you that myself, our team in Nashville, Florida, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, we are telling your loved ones things that they don't like quite often. Not all the time. I like giving good news too, trust me. And I don't like shooting people down. That's not what we're here to do. But we have to go against, we're not battling against drugs and alcohol. Remember this, right? After someone's become chemically dependent and they've entered into the stage of addiction or alcoholism, I'm not battling the drug or alcohol. I'm battling against the most manipulative version of your loved one. And they're not battling drugs or alcohol. They're battling against the most manipulative version of themselves, which is a very cunning and baffling person that can come up with excuse after excuse, rationalize after rationalize. They can get to a point where they can manipulate themselves, and they have done it. So when your loved one says and calls you at 14 days sober and says, I know what I need to do, it's very unlikely that that's the case. No. It's very unlikely that's the case. I'm not saying they don't have good intentions, but remember, like I said, right, that good recovery lives in a place where intentions and actions are parallel. And if their intention is to be sober and their action is, I'm gonna leave treatment early, even though I said I was going to be there for a month, I'm going to only stay 14 days because I've got all I need. They're already going out the other way, right? Making a commitment is making a commitment. It's incredibly important that people keep their commitments in recovery because, like I said, when your loved one has the chance to take responsibility for their actions and they did an action that's good for their life and good for their recovery, they're going to be proud of it.
Life will change.
The more moments that they have that they're proud of, they're going to start to feel more whole inside, and they get to a point where those symptoms of depression start to get a little bit better. They start to actually get to a point where they can learn how to love themselves again, right? That's what we're trying to teach people, how to fall in love with themselves. But it takes time. It takes time. It's not a one-day thing. It's not a one-time conversation, right? Because it's easy for me to say, Karl, you need to learn how to love yourself before you can love somebody else. Cool. He understands that. He accepts it. But how does he do it? You know, in order to love yourself, if you want to figure out how to love yourself, you got to spend time with yourself. You got to have experiences with yourself. You got to learn about who you are and why I am the way I am, why I act and why I think the way that I do. And a lot of that comes through the therapy. Let's hit a couple of questions here.
Come on.
Let's hit a couple of questions. I'm seeing on the social media side, we got a couple shout outs, which is great. That's always nice. Appreciate that. And all right. Question here is what can you expect for a first-time 21-year-old entering treatment? Well, it's tough to put a blanket over this one, but I'll tell you what I can expect. First time somebody going to treatment for the first time at 21 years old, that's a difficult time. Obviously, I'm going to say it's going to depend on what they're using, but to say this, I'll say this, is that 21 is still such a place where a person's brain isn't even really truly fully developed yet. And I'll say this as well. Let's say a person starts using drugs and alcohol at a young age. Let's say, even something as light as they say as marijuana. Let's say they start using at 13, 14 years old, which is pretty much the average age somebody starts using marijuana this day and age. And, they use it and, they use it recreationally with their friends, yada, yada. And then, whatever, maybe it upgrades into more intense drugs or alcohol. But there's always been a consistent usage. The problem that person's going to have, which is the story for many of our clients, not all, but many, is that at the age of 13 and 14, when they just started to experience significant emotion, because, a baby cries and toddlers cry, which seems significant, but sometimes it's meaningless. I have a 2.5-year-old and she cried this morning because I didn't let her close the refrigerator after we got her yogurt. So, but that was really intense for her. Now, we take this 13 and 14-year-old who's just starting to experience significant emotion, we give them a minor mood-altering substance that just diminishes those things. So if I'm 15 and I struggle with anxiety and I also smoke marijuana, marijuana does a really good job at just knocking that anxiety out of the park. I don't even have to feel it. And it makes me calm. Why are you telling me to stop doing it? I feel better when I do it. Okay, now let's make that person 21 just for the sake of this conversation. That person still doesn't necessarily have the ability to handle significant emotion, understand, navigate their emotions to a point where they can understand them, know how to stabilize their own mood, know how to regulate, which makes it incredibly difficult. So what can I expect? I'm a first-time 21-year-old entering treatment is some resistance, solely for the fact that most likely at 21, not too many significant issues have happened. Probably some issues if the fact that they ended up in treatment, there's definitely been some issues, and which would be significant, but maybe they haven't lost that much yet. Maybe they haven't lost their place to live or their source of income or their source of support, financial support. I would probably expect a bit of resistance. And I've worked with many people like that. I've worked with college students who literally came straight from a frat house right to the treatment center. And they have a really hard time because the drinking and partying was accepted. So I say this, though. With the right boundaries in place, and if your loved one follows all the suggestions that we have to offer, which might include sober living, which might include taking part in all levels of care, it's going to give them the best chance to be able to stay sober. Now, But ultimately, what this all is riding on is your loved ones, and this applies to everybody here. What everything is riding on is your loved one's motivation to actually want to be sober. So let's say that you that you laid down a really hard boundary and got them to go, and that may apply to many people on this call.
Don't say anything you cannot back up when it comes to a boundary. Please, if you're gonna set a boundary, do not say anything you cannot back up, because otherwise we lose our leverage. So please trust the team, trust the process, hold the boundary. Please hold the boundary. Little disclaimer.
Yeah, no, that's a great disclaimer, because it's true. If you said something in the beginning, like, hey, if you don't complete this, we're going to take this away, or we're not going to help you pay for that, or we're not going to do this, or you can't come back to my house, make sure you actually hold that boundary, because the fact of the matter is you might get a phone call 5 days into them being there, like I said earlier, where they say, this isn't for me. Put it this way. We have great facilities. Amenities are nice. They're beautiful. They're great places. We do all of that so that we can let people focus on their treatment. Mm-hmm. So the fact of the matter is we want people to be able to engage in a community and be a part of something bigger than themselves. So for you who asked that question about your loved one being 21 and entering for the first time, I'd say they have just as good a shot as anybody else at staying sober. It really just depends on the level of motivation and how much they want it. Our job and what we do, and not even just a job, our passion and my own personal passion is being able to shift someone's perspective, is being able to take a 21-year-old who believes that it wasn't really that bad. It just kind of got a little bad for a few weeks, but I was using opiates, but I could still drink. I never had a problem with that. I'm trying to shift the perspective, because this is something that we see all the time. Something we see all the time is people who are using one substance and want to leave treatment and go use a different one. That apparently they didn't have a problem with. Now, that may be true. They may have not had a problem with alcohol and it was only opiates or cocaine or something, or pills. But the fact of the matter is go back to what I said earlier about the person who started using at a young age and doesn't necessarily know how to regulate their emotions. If they start using anything, it's just going to put them back into the same pattern, most likely. Is it a guarantee they will return back to their drug of choice? No, it's not a guarantee, but it increases the chances exponentially. So, like I said, this is already something, recovering from addiction and alcoholism is already something that the odds are so heavily stacked against the individual. Leaving treatment and then deciding to go use a lesser substance or whatever that may be is just taking those odds that are already bad and making them even worse, right? We're trying to increase the chances little by little of your loved one being able to stay sober long term. And we have so many success stories. I mean, there's, gratefully to be at Recovery Unplugged 7 years. I mean, so many clients that I've seen go through treatment are now my coworkers, which is awesome. I love it. I mean, here in Nashville, there's at least about 5 alumni staff members now, and we've only been open for 3 years. So it's an amazing thing to be able to see that journey unfold. Everybody's loved one here, they have the ability to be able to stay sober long term. And here's the thing, sometimes when your loved one doesn't have the willingness or commitment, sometimes that's where you have to come in and lay down the boundary, or lay down the, laying down the law, as they say. I was working once with a young guy. He was in his early 20s, maybe 23, 24 years old. He lived with his mother. And before he came to treatment, he had overdosed in their house. And she found him and was able to revive him, thankfully. And he came to treatment and he was doing okay there. And then we were getting to the discussion of discharge planning, and he then, proceeded to say, I'm going back to my mom's house. And I had already had a couple conversations with her where she said, I do not want him in my house. I'm going to drive myself mad if he's living here. because I just can't go through the stress of potentially walking in on this ever again. And so I said, okay, well, we're going to have to probably have a difficult conversation with him where you're going to let him know that he has to go to sober living and he's not welcome back at your house. And she was very scared of this because this was a mother who was enabling consistently and now had to lay down a boundary that was going to be very difficult. And she's like, I'm really worried that I'm going to cave in, whatever it may be. And and I said something that was difficult to say to a mother. As I said, we'll say her name's Joanne just for the purpose of this. I said, Joanne, I'm just going to paint this picture for you. I mean, look at it this way. Would you rather have the potential of him being dead in your house or him being mad at you for 2 days and be in a treatment center? Because that's really what it was. She laid down the boundary. She did it. It was difficult for her, but she did it. He was mad at her for literally like a day or two. And then he ended up actually apologizing to her because he said some things that weren't too nice. And she was very proud of herself. They had a very different dynamic in their relationship ever since that moment. He stopped pushing as hard because he realized she was going to push back. And moral of the story on that one is that individual is still sober today for 6 years, which is a beautiful story.
Hold the boundary.
Yes.
Next question.
All right. The next question here was sent in a direct message. I'm not sure if you meant to do that or not, so I won't release all the information. But so the moral of this question is, how are we recommending that you ensure that there's no paraphernalia, drugs, or alcohol still in the house, and you're nervous about them potentially returning home? So I would make sure that you relay this concern to your loved one's therapist at the facility. More than likely, we're usually able to get that information out of your loved one and be able to find that out while they're here. And a lot of times, I've had so many clients, when I bring up that topic in group, I'll say, is anybody willing to admit that they have any drugs or alcohol still at their house that their family doesn't know about? And then usually I'll have a side conversation with them afterwards, like, listen, let's go make that phone call. Mm-hmm. With most, when we're talking about drugs specifically, it does happen where people leave a little stash for when they get out of treatment. But the majority of the time, addiction is so intense that they typically use it all before they come. Now, in this situation specifically, I would make sure that you get in contact with your loved one's therapist, because and let the therapist do a little bit of digging, because that and there's no guarantee, right? Obviously, you can search and do what you need to do, but also kind of brings me to the other conversation of if you are incredibly nervous about your loved one returning back into your home, it may be a different conversation of potentially drawing a boundary there. And I know that will require a little bit more discussion, of course. All right. So we have here, can you clarify the PHP? How many hours are they in the facility? How many hours are they outside? So they're typically in groups. They're at the facility from about 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. in groups. That's counting breaks and lunch. And then afterwards, they're going back to the residence, eating dinner. We were taking people to the gym pre-COVID. I believe at some of the locations, we're taking people to the gym and then eating dinner. And then they typically go to an outside 12-step or another type of recovery program meeting afterwards. So they're honestly pretty busy and they got a tight schedule. They don't have too much free time. Now, I know at this level of care, your loved one also has their cell phone. So I'm going to let Karl touch on that real quick of when your loved one gets into lower levels of care and now they have their phone and they're blowing you up.
All righty, folks. We're back to the enabling and the boundaries. There is a treatment team that is providing services for your loved one. We are trained, educated professionals on how to deal with any crisis your loved one can come up with. If they're coming to you, they most likely don't like our answer. And so that is probably why they're blowing you up. Again, we are willing to do family phone calls with you guys to help support you. Anytime there's urgency around a decision, that's a red flag. So please try and include us as to how we can help empower you, slow down the process, and make a good decision based on logic versus urgency. So just kind of know and I just also want to, from personal recovery, when I was brand new sober, everything feels like you're on the Titanic and it's going down. You're not, I was not equipped. Although I was 38 years old physically, I was only emotionally about 15. And we talked about that earlier, the emotional maturity. So I had to learn that what I thought was a crisis wasn't always a crisis. And I need to include people to help me make a sound decision instead of one based on emotions. So include us in the process. If they're blowing you up, probably not liking our answer. And just direct them back to the team, and we can help find a compromise or other solutions that may work a lot better.
Yeah.
Because with new freedoms of the phone also becomes new temptations. And so we really try and minimize the damage that can be done around them and the people around them. So again, to help them make better choices.
Yeah, it can be intense during that time period, and that's tough for us too, because during those levels of care, they do get that freedom back of having their phone, and we can't control those things. Now, the best thing to do is, if, let's say you're, God forbid, you're going through this, your loved one's calling you too much, let us know.
Mm-hmm.
Let us know and just say, listen, these calls aren't productive, and whatever it may be. And a lot of times we see this on the front end as well. I remember working with a client who in the beginning was like, I really just want to just say hi to my family once a day. So we did it in the beginning. And then the phone conversation started to be like, okay, hey, Dad, what are you doing? And Dad's like, oh, I'm watching TV. Okay, what are you watching? I was like, okay, this is not necessary for now. In that case, that the client I was working with, what she was trying to do was she was trying to almost just be home while being at treatment. And it's just, sometimes it's very difficult for your loved one to be away, because we change their environment. Their environment's completely different now. They're at a new place. They're sleeping in a new bed. They're around brand new people they've never met before. They're around a lot of people that are like them, which is also very difficult to do, because they look and they see themselves in the mirror so often. Their behaviors, some of their irrational thinking patterns are being called out. They're being put out in the open.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to go through that. And one thing I will promise you, if you've heard this before from your loved one, not all of you may have heard this. Some of you potentially have. I promise you that your loved one can find someone in the facility who's worse than them. Now, I promise they can find 10 people,
or their true love,
or their
true love.
If that happens, we're looking at a really dark road. But sometimes you might get a call, say, man, I'm not like these other people. These people are so much worse than me. Now, theoretically, that could be true. That your loved one may have been in early phases of addiction, and then they met this person that's been to treatment 10 times, and they're like, whoa, that's not me. I'm not going to be like that. But just remember that the person that went to treatment 10 times went to treatment for a first time too. And the fact of the matter is that sometimes your loved one may use that as an excuse to tell you that they don't need to be there because they're not like the other people there. They will always be able to find a worse one. And there's probably some other client at the facility looking at your loved one saying he or she is worse than me. And when those comparisons start to begin, that's just the beginnings of rationalizing why they don't need to be there. It's very rare that people end up in an inpatient drug and alcohol treatment center by mistake. It's rare. I can't really say I've seen it. And even the cases that are like, it's a little, maybe it was inpatient was a little too intense for this person, that person still greatly benefits from the treatment, because we're talking about such a high level of individual and group therapy every day that the average person doesn't get. The average person who's in therapy goes to therapy once a week for an hour. and your loved one is getting 40, 50 hours of therapy and treatment per week, I mean, this is a lot. That's why and it brings me back to the continuum of care. That's why it's so important, because we're going from like high intensity 50, 60 hours down to like 50, then down to like 40, then, then like down to 35, 40, then down to like 10 at the IOP level of care. And there was another question in there that I'll address right now. Somebody asked, what's the level of care that comes after IOP? Intensive outpatient program would be just outpatient. OP would be the acronym. Outpatient is typically when a person is now just going to a facility or some type of outpatient clinic where they're just doing individual therapy, maybe like one group per week, but they're doing individual therapy. They may be doing some medication management with a psychiatric provider, but that's like typical outpatient. So like your average person that goes and sees a therapist one time a week, that would be just outpatient. So that would be the lowest level of care. So if any of you have a loved one that's struggling with addiction at home right now, and they're telling you that they just need individual therapy, that would be the lowest level of care to treat the highest level of addiction. Call Karl. Yes. So we'll hit a couple more questions, and then we have a couple more topics that we're going to work in, and then also work that in with the questions here. And my encourage everybody on here, once again, just for anybody that joined late, if you have a question, post it in the chat, whether you're on the social media or on the Zoom. If you have a question, post it in the chat. We will address it. And if you ever go on mute, I will be there to mute you. Kindly, of course.
Kindly.
So for the virtual IOP, what hours during the day? So for the virtual IOP, we have a morning and an evening option. The morning option runs from 9 to 12, and then the evening option runs from 6 to 9. All right. What happens if my loved one relapses in a sober living house?
It's very common. Again, when our clients get to what we call sober housing, one of the biggest reasons I see clients begin to unravel in sober living is that it's that self-destruct mode, self-sabotage. When things start to get a little too good, a little solid, stable, for an alcoholic addict, we self-destruct because we're so used to the chaos of addiction. So we have resources in place to help the loved one get back into the appropriate level of care. The continuum care model is designed to come in or out at any level based on the acuity of what's going on with the client and the drug. And so, again, we've got all the teams and resources. And most often than not, we're going to get the therapist involved at the original level of care, regroup and see, okay, what happened? What did we miss? And again, include the client in the process. That's the big thing is we're not going to judge. We're not going to shame them. You can never, ever shame somebody sober, guys. I really want you to hear that. We do education, encouragement, music therapy, art therapy. We're using every media we can to empower our clients to have confidence in themselves to change their lives no matter what level of care they're in.
Yeah. And shame is something that's so difficult for our clients to deal with. If you ever want to get a really good understanding of vulnerability and shame, there's 2 great TED Talks that are by Bremer Brown. I'll post her name in the chat if you want to check that out. Bremer Brown, basically anything that she has posted on YouTube, many of it's available on YouTube. She does a lot of talk about how shame impacts a person, how it impacts their thinking, their behaviors, and she talks about the difference between shame and guilt, right? Shame being me believing that I am a bad person. Guilt is saying that I actually did something bad, that I feel bad about. But being able to differentiate between those two is something that we're working on with your loved ones, of trying to differentiate their actions in active addiction and alcoholism versus who they actually are. And it's tough for them to decipher that, especially in early recovery. So there's a lot of shame that's still rolling around in their heads, like, oh my God, I can't believe I stole from my grandmother, or whatever it may be, right? That's just a mild example, but like those things that they've done, and it's tough, right? Because as the loved one and as the family member, sometimes you're too quick to forgive. Sometimes, because here's the thing, it goes back to the codependency piece. Sometimes as a loved one, we're too quick to forgive, because if I forgive, it'll settle the dust. And if I forgive and the dust is settled, we'll be in a happier place.
No conflict.
No conflict, right? We get to a point, if I'm a family member and I'm codependent and we're in active addiction, sometimes I'm too easy. I forgive too quickly because, and I'm not saying that you need to hold a grudge. I'm not saying that you need to hold it over their head and wiggle it around. Like, remember that? Remember that? You don't need to do that either. But there's a medium place in between where, and this is another Karl quote here. I'll give credit this time, is don't listen to what they say. Watch what they do. Watch what they're doing. Don't just listen to every single word, because especially if there was an extreme dynamic there of just years and years of manipulation, just because they've now gotten sober and we remove the drugs and alcohol, it doesn't mean that the manipulation is now just deceased. Unfortunately, it's still there to a degree. So watch their actions, watch what they do. You know, this thing right here that's allowing me to talk, that is an action, right? So if all the phone calls you got while they were in active addiction or alcoholism was them asking you for something, and then they get to treatment, and every phone call that you get is them asking you for something, not much has changed yet.
Nope.
Not much has changed yet. A lot of times, many of the clients that I see doing really well aren't really making too many phone calls while they're here, because they're focused on them. Mm-hmm. They might call home once a week and whatnot. And listen, it's hit or miss. I've seen people that make quite a few phone calls that are taking everything seriously as well. But it just depends, you know, really listen and look out for the red flags. When you see the red flags, let the treatment team know, call the therapist and say, hey, listen, you know, when we were talking the other night, he was talking about this or this. Let us know, because sometimes, listen, just because we are well-versed in this does not mean that we cannot be manipulated. We can be. I got to say, I got a really good, you know, Karl, myself, we have really, really good lie detectors because we've been doing this for a long time, but that doesn't mean that we can't be tricked. I've been played before. I've been manipulated. It's happened. It doesn't happen too frequently. I'd like to say we're pretty good at dodging that, but it will happen if we don't have the right information. And I meant to say this earlier. If your loved one is at, like, let's say the PHP or IOP level of care and they're at sober living. Now, this doesn't apply to everyone here, but some of you it may. Finances. If your loved one is consistently asking you for money and more money, let the team know what's going on. Touch base with the team and say, hey, you know, Joey keeps asking me for, you know, he's asking me for $50 every other day, you know, and then because Joey might be coming to us and complaining about the fact that he doesn't have any money, but meanwhile, he's getting $50 or $100 a day from his family and we have no clue. So when it comes to finances, if your loved one is in sober living, IOP level of care, and that doesn't apply to everyone here, but if it does, communicate with the team. Have a plan for finances. If you are going to be financially supporting them for a little bit, have a plan that you've drawn out with the therapist and your loved one that everybody's in agreement with, right? I'll help you out with this. I'll get you a food card so that you can get groceries, and I'm going to help you up to this point. And this is where I want you, and when you get to this point, I want you to be taking care of things yourself.
Yep.
So it's okay to help them a little bit financially in the beginning if it has to be done. But there needs to be a point where they're releasing and now they're taking care of it themselves. Brings me back to that other point of them being proud of themselves or taking care of their business.
Great question over here on the social media platform.
Yes.
Lisa.
Oh, yes. All right. So the question is, what is the approximate amount of times people seek rehab before you see them take it seriously? I'd say, I like to be as open-minded as possible, and I don't like to put a number on this. I'll tell you what the nationwide statistic is, and then I'll give you my own opinion. The nationwide statistic says that that people will attempt to get sober 7 times before staying sober. That's nationwide, and I don't know if that number is just pertaining to people that seek treatment, but I'll tell you this: that the majority, probably over 50%, actually probably easily over 50% of our clients, probably at all of our locations, is not their first time in treatment. Now, does that mean that if you're on this call and your loved one's in treatment for the first time, that you should prepare for a relapse? No, I'm not saying that. But statistics are saying that it's likely to happen. But statistics are saying that it's likely for anybody to relapse, even somebody who's been to treatment 26 times. I've seen people get sober on their first time in treatment. I've seen people get sober on their second, third, fourth, fifth, 25th, 40th. It doesn't, there's no number I can tell you that's going to be the time that they get it. It goes back to how willing are they?
Case by case.
It's case by case ultimately, but we can typically tell when a person wants it. And it's by their actions. They're showing up to the groups. They're showing up to their individuals. They're participating. They're being honest. They're getting vulnerable. They're taking suggestions. They're making themselves a part of the community and making sure that they're engaging with the other members of the community. Those are the things that we see that typically lead to a person doing very well long term. It just depends on how willing they are. So it's tough to put a number on that, but I would say that when it comes to hitting a rock bottom, there's so many schools of thought on this. And I'll say this, is that I've seen people not hit an absolute rock bottom and stay sober. But they've hit previous rock bottoms. And this time it wasn't that bad, but they don't want it to go back to there. They have experienced a rock bottom. So it really just depends. And rock bottom is that place where a person gets to where they finally say, I've had enough. Where the consequences of their actions get to a place where they can't lower their standards any further to deal with them. Because for a person to engage in active addiction or alcoholism, they must lower their standards.
Great question, Lisa.
Yeah.
Great question.
Thank you for that, Lisa. And we'll hit another one over here on this screen here. Somebody's saying, my son is in treatment currently. It's not his first, second, or third time. He has not called us this time, and he's been there for 2 weeks. Should we be concerned? Should we call the facility? Well, I'd say this. I'd say that it never hurts to call the facility and check in to see how they're doing. And like I said earlier, sometimes when they're not calling, that's a good sign, because that means that they're focusing on themselves and they're not, especially if there's been some type of dynamic where they've manipulated you in the past, potentially before. I would say that calling the facility is going to be the safest bet, because it's going to allow you to get a third person view of how your loved one's doing. So it really just depends on that. I would definitely, I'm going to just, that was my long way of saying yes, definitely call the facility, get a check-in with the therapist, with the team over there to see how things are going.
Right
I appreciate that.
Right on.
All right. Let's see. There's a couple here that little quick ones. Is IOP covered by insurance? 99% of the time, yes. If your loved one is at Recovery Unplugged right now at a higher level of care through their insurance, it is very likely that IOP will cover insurance. That insurance will cover IOP. Typically, most insurance companies are authorizing about 30 sessions of IOP, which would, if at 3 times a week, that would equate to 10 weeks. Words are hard today, huh?
We talk for a living. Thank you, ladies and
gentlemen. I know. I got a lot of
Thank
practice in this. Is it enabling to give in to guilt trips?
I got this. So if we're doing guilt trips, we're back to unhealthy boundaries, ladies and gentlemen. You cannot shame somebody sober. You cannot ultimatum them into sobriety. It's just an unhealthy behavior. What we're trying to do, guys, is empower people to make better choices based on truth, honesty, character, integrity, the things that are going to help them outside of the home. Again, that's why I'm so passionate about the family education. Guys, guilt trips do not bring and create levels of reconciliation. And that's what we're trying to do. If I could really encourage you with one thing is when they call, don't ask about their recovery. Just ask them how they are. Because it's really important that if they want to talk about the recovery, they will. Mm-hmm. If you're doing guilt trips, it can spin the client out for a whole afternoon. If we get guilt trip phone calls from family, run it by the treatment team. This is what I'm thinking about saying. We will give you the words to reframe that comes out in a way that's therapeutic versus guilt trip. The content can be very similar, but it's in a therapeutic way.
Very good point made. I may have read the question wrong because it says, is it enabling to give in to a guilt trip? That would be a yes to that as well. Yes. So when you're giving, now that is a tough one. And sometimes your loved one can be an emotional
train wreck. Manipulator.
Exactly. So I was stealing your quote again. I wanted you to finish it. So sometimes your loved one can be
emotional terrorist.
That's what I was looking for. So sometimes your loved one can be somewhat of an emotional terrorist, and that is no offense to anybody's loved ones. Do not take it that way. And that's not how we talk about your loved ones. And they know they do this. When they're guilt tripping you or threatening you, and I see this most commonly when they really want something and you're saying no. And they're like, well, I'm just going to go out there and I'm going to go get high. And they threaten you with their usage because they know you don't want them to use. And they know if they threaten that you may give in because you don't want that to happen. I'm not saying call the bluff, but there's going to come a point where you potentially have to call that bluff. Mm-hmm. Now, you are not responsible for your loved one's actions. You saying no to something that they want, that you know, and you've been recommended that this is not what's best for them, is not hurting them. It's not. The only thing it's hurting is their addiction. It's punching their addiction right in the face when you say no to something that they don't need, that they're trying to manipulate you for. So, and it's difficult because when I was working with this guy one time, and a client that I actually mentioned earlier, who his family member was a heavy enabler. And the problem with this dynamic is they were in so deep, years of enabling, and it was heavy enabling, where it was hard for the family member to just pull back and finally say no, right? And so this guy's in treatment, and he says he wants to leave, and he's expecting his family member to buy him a plane ticket. He's expecting it. I sat down with him and I said, you really think that he wants you to be here? Do you really think he's going to buy you that plane ticket? He looked me dead in the eyes. He said, yep, I know he will. I know he will. He's like, I know that it's going to take a while, but he's going to do it. And he was just being honest. He knew that his family member would cave, but little did he know, his family member got a lot of coaching from me beforehand and was prepared for the conversation. And he laid down the boundary. And the client signed himself out of treatment, sat out in the parking lot for about 4 hours, berating his family member on his cell phone, berating him over and over again. And the family member did not let up. What happened 4 hours later? He walked right back into the treatment facility and then completed treatment. Now, it's tough when you're getting guilt tripped or you're getting threatened to say no. But here's the thing, right? When two outcomes are potentially going to come from you laying down a boundary, right? And especially when we're talking about deadly drugs, right? And so I know some of you here, your loved ones dealing with deadly substances, and really they all are at the end of the day. Even alcohol, withdrawal from alcohol is the deadliest. It actually is the highest rate of death. So when it comes down to cutting a person off, laying down a very firm boundary, two outcomes are potential to come. Your loved one will either stay sober or they're going to die. Now, if you enable them, they're either going to stay sober or they're going to die. The two outcomes are the same on both sides of it. It just depends where you're going to be. If God forbid that were to occur, God forbid the worst situation was to occur, and you gave them the money, or you enabled them to do something, you're gonna beat yourself up. Will you be able to work through that and forgive yourself? Yes, you will, because I've helped parents through that before. I've seen this situation too many times, unfortunately. In 12 years of doing this, unfortunately, I've met hundreds of people that have passed away from this before, unfortunately. And it's difficult, and I feel terrible for the families. And I know that that's the worst fear here. So what we're trying to do is avoid that. And I promise you that, the boundaries will be just incredible for the relationship. And when it comes down to instilling these boundaries and actually implementing them,
they'll respect you.
Yes.
They will respect you when you hold that boundary. I promise.
Mm-hmm. Got it. All right. Who knows? Yep. Somebody said your loved one knows who to guilt. That's true. Your loved one does know who to guilt, and they know who to try to manipulate because they know who's an easier target. Okay. Al-Anon has sponsees. Yes. You can get a sponsor through Al-Anon, just like you can in the 12-step program, and you can work through the steps. The best part about Al-Anon and Nar-Anon and these programs for families is that you're in there with other families who are fighting the same battle. Mm-hmm. There's family members that have been going to Al-Anon for years, even though their loved one's still not sober. And there's family members that go to Al-Anon for years, even though their loved one is sober. Because let's say your loved one is in the classification of people that takes recovery extremely seriously and they stay sober. It's a different dynamic. It's a very different dynamic than the relationship that you had while they were using. All of a sudden, they're different. And you kind of need to adjust and learn how to deal with them being sober and them being responsible, and you kind of pulling the reins back and not wanting to know so much or be too involved. There's a process to that, and it's important that you have the support and people that are also going through that. What % of addicts also have mental illness? How does dual diagnosis work?
Great question.
Great question.
Who wants it?
Oh, I mean, I could talk about anything.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. Guys, I just want to say that fentanyl has been such a game changer when it comes to the treatment programs, and mental illness is just another component around what contributes. What we're looking here as a therapist is I'm looking for the underlying issues. Drugs and alcohol are just a coping skill, a bad coping skill that gets out of control. More often than not, I'd say 85% of our clients have underlying issues: anxiety, depression, trauma, abandonment, abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, religious abuse. And it is our job to help find those underlying issues. And it doesn't always surface at the first time in treatment, or sometimes the second. But what we keep doing is we keep building confidence into our clients to help them get to a place where they can be vulnerable and trust the process and trust the therapy and the team. But dual diagnosis is a very big part of recovery. And so I just want to really give a shout out to, there's also great support groups in the community around mental health in addition to 12-step. And so we will also find those resources for our clients so that they can continue their aftercare, not just for their recovery, but for their depression, anxiety, and other disorders. One thing that we will get to tonight as well, what's called medically assisted therapy. And that helps also, again, around the dual diagnosis. I had a client that was just in and out of treatment, and we couldn't get him sober. We couldn't keep him sober. And all of a sudden we got a really good diagnosis around his bipolar. And then we got a really good stable medication regime set up. and now he's doing really, really well. But we had to get him sober long enough to really let the diagnosis of bipolar present itself that wasn't mirroring active addiction. And so for many of our clients, it's hard to get a good, accurate diagnosis in early recovery because withdrawals and behaviors in addiction can mirror underlying issues.
Mm-hmm.
So we're always, again, checking in on the client, not just a month out of treatment, but we have an alumni team that all they do all day long is check on our clients years out from discharge to make sure, again, how's your recovery? How's your mental health? So that we can make sure we got the resources around them to keep them on the beam.
Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah. It's unlikely for someone that's coming through our facility to not deal with some type of mental illness. We're not here trying to slap diagnoses on people, right? But when you look at, right, remember that picture I painted earlier of the person that starts using drugs and alcohol at a young age and doesn't have this ability to emotionally regulate. That goes the same for the person that started their active addiction in their 30s or their 40s. They started to mask all of their emotions and numb them to a degree where they didn't have to feel them. They didn't have to deal with them. And now all of a sudden they got sober. Now they have this massive anxiety. You might hear this on the phone from your loved one sometime, like, my anxiety's through the roof, because they don't have the numbing tool that they had before, the numbing agent. It's like having this, I mean, anxiety is one of the most common that we see among our clients. Depression is also very common. Trauma, I mean, really, they're all common at the end of the day. Addiction and alcoholism in itself is a traumatic experience for what many of our clients have to go through. So when it comes to treating this, we're treating both at the same time. We're treating them together. We're not treating one, then the other. Now, when it comes to trauma specifically, you're going to hear about treatment methods like EMDR. It's not recommended that people take place in intensive trauma therapy until they have about 3 to 6 months sober, really more towards the 6 months sober, because going back into those depths of their brain and their subconscious too early in recovery when they're so vulnerable and they can't regulate their emotions is going to be extremely difficult for them. And it could actually lead to them becoming dysregulated and potentially go back to their drug of choice to deal with those symptoms. The brain is meant to remember extremely pleasurable and extremely painful. Everything else in between we can recall, but we have to think about it, right? You got to think about what you ate for dinner 2 weeks ago. But if it was the best meal you ever had, you'll never forget it. So when it comes to the person getting sober, their brain is actually telling them that when I feel this anxious, that pill is the only thing that gets me to the point where I'm calm, right? People that have been prescribed Xanax or a benzodiazepine for their anxiety for years and years and years develop this belief because it works. It eliminates the anxiety. But the problem with typical benzodiazepine for dealing with anxiety is that it doesn't actually teach the person how to deal with anxiety. All it does is teach them that if I take this, I won't feel anxious. Now, that's not necessarily effective because when it comes down to it, anxiety is a normal emotion, right? We get jittery, we get the nerves when we have something big coming up in our life and we feel anxious. It's normal. Now, generalized anxiety, social anxiety, panic attacks, those things come about when a person doesn't necessarily have the ability to regulate back to center. The way to look at depression and anxiety 101 in a beginner's class is depression is looking too far backwards, anxiety is looking too far forwards. Because anxiety is typically related to the future. What's going to happen? What if this? What if that? Depression is me looking back at the pain and the shame of my actions or the things that have happened to me and staying consumed into that. Great question, by the way.
Awesome question.
All right. We have one here. He has been in and out of rehab 6 or 7 times in the past 2 years. He's been struggling for the past 30 years. The last time he was released from rehab only lasted 20 minutes, and he was drunk by the time he got home. Was this a continuation of another one? I'm not sure, but I will say this is that, I've been shocked so many times working in this field, and I've worked with clients that have done incredibly well in treatment and have relapsed hours after getting out. One of the toughest parts, right, when I was working in Florida, I worked at our Florida facility for a while before moving out to Nashville, is many of the people for Florida treatment was a destination for them, where they weren't from there. And then the next thing you know, they complete treatment and have this amazing experience, and then boom, they're in an airport. One of the most triggering places for many of our clients. And some people don't know this, but you can go up to a staff member in the airport and say you're a friend of Bill, who is the man who created the 12-step program. And many airports have somebody in the airport that will actually come sit with you when you let them know that, because they know that you're someone in recovery and you're worried about potentially drinking in the airport. Just a food for thought for other people. I mean, there's also other things out there. There's sober transports. There's sober companions. Mm-hmm. A lot of people utilize these as well for travel.
Sober coaching.
Sober coaches. Now, these are some we'll call them like extracurriculars that your loved one can take part in after treatment. These are typically things that insurance will not cover and can get pricey, just to be honest. It's not something that we offer, but we know people that do this. Sober coaching is, you can have somebody who's keeping in contact with you pretty much every other day and potentially even taking you to meetings and taking you places, doing things with you. There's full-blown sober companionship where a person can actually live with you and do everything with you every single day. That's on the higher end of expensive, but can be effective. It's not typically something that we set up for our clients that often, because a lot of times resources may not be there for that.
Don't give up on them, guys. I want to go back to hope. Again, we have been in this business a long time and see a lot of miracles. Don't give up. If they're asking for help, point them to us, to the right resources. We can connect them. Do not be a savior. Do not be a superhero. We are trained, educated professionals that we do this every day. Please don't give up. Point them back to us. We got resources. We can connect and help them. Don't give up.
And what always happens when we run this family program here is when we get deep into the questions, we end up actually going over all the topics we planned on anyway through the questions. So it's you guys always do a good job. All right, back to it. What to look for in picking out sober living? What are some good practices for a person in sober living? What to look out for in a sober living is making sure that they have a curfew, making sure they're doing drug testing, breathalyzing, and and if able, I encourage you to have contact with the sober living manager directly so that they can provide you some updates, let you know how things are going. Like I said,
optics.
Watch what they're doing. Don't listen to what they say. Now, if you can't physically be there to watch, have contact with the person who's managing the sober living so they can give you some inside information, because it allows you to kind of keep tabs on the situation without being there physically to watch. And good practices for somebody in sober living, most sober livings are going to require people to go to meetings. They're going to require them to get a job. I've seen sober livings that don't allow people to be at the house from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. because they want them working and out looking for work, and they won't even allow you to sit at home. Nowadays, you don't see that as much, to be honest. That's how it was in the past. Nowadays, I don't see that as much. What are some specific things families should do? Some specific things families should do with regard to preparing the home or family dynamic when the person's returning home.
This is one of your favorites.
This is a good one. I do like this one. So, all right. Preparing for a family member to come back home. So some things you could do is try to create a different experience in the home. I've worked with many clients who, while they're in treatment, their loved one actually changes some things around the house, and even like changes the colors of a couple rugs and a couple drapes, or whatever, moves the couch to a different spot. And when I'm working with clients, I talk about the muscle memory of being in an environment, right? Because returning home is almost like returning to the scene of the crime for your loved one. Let's say that they were sitting on that far left side of the couch, legs up, just kicking them back every day after work. If the first thing they do when they get home is sit in that same spot on the couch, that's not going to be good. It's going to be an incredibly triggering event for them.
Yes.
It's going to be triggering for them to sit back on the couch. It's going to be triggering to get back into their vehicle. It's going to be triggering for you when they sit there. Try to switch some things up if feasible. I'm not saying to go buy all new furniture. I mean, if you got the resources to do it, go for it. But changing some things around the house a little bit can create a new experience for your loved one at home. And as far as like other things that you can do to prepare, make sure that some boundaries are in place of some expectations as well. Like, we want you to be doing this. We want you to be going to this many meetings, or whatever it may be. For people, if your loved one struggles with alcohol, there's a great resource out there called SoberLink. SoberLink. I'm going to put it in the chat. SoberLink is a breathalyzer device that actually has a camera on it, and it takes a picture of the person while they are blowing into it. You can set it so that they have to blow in this device a certain amount of times per week or per day even, and then the results are sent directly to you. That would be something that you want to have a discussion with while they're here, and get everybody on board. Make sure everyone's in agreement. Don't just flop it on them. Don't just say, "Hey, you're going to do this."
Not be
Don't
authority,
do that, because
right.
that probably won't go too well. Have an agreement.
Right.
SoberLink. The first month is more expensive because you're paying for the device and the service. It's around like $800, and then after that, it's like $150 or $200 a month for the service. Most people that have done it that I've seen, that's not something that we offer, by the way. That's a completely separate entity. Most people that do it for about 90 days when I see that. And then also, too, my request to you who asked that, or my suggestion to you who asked that question, is to make sure that you're also speaking to your loved one's therapist about what the aftercare plan is, if they're going to take part in individual therapy or an intensive outpatient program while they're home, whether they're doing one in person or maybe they're doing our virtual program. And our virtual program is only available to people who live in the states that we operate.
One little disclaimer over here about, hey, will this be recorded and shared so we can view this again and again?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we can. This will be on our
Facebook and YouTube.
Yes, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn even. You will be able to access the recording of this if you ever want to watch it back. Or if you got here late and you want to catch the whole thing.
Every month.
Does there come a time where you learn how to forgive? I have been through this with my son countless times for 16 years now. I have held him dead in my arms with our basement filled with EMS and police trying to get him back to life. I have also lost family members to addiction and also grew up with alcoholic mother and stepfather. So I will not ever give up hope, but when he has gone 3 years sober, I still have all the past in my head and have not fully trusted him.
Got this one.
Also, how do you know when they hit their rock bottom? He went in on his own this time. This is the first time also that he has actually ended up homeless before he came in. Could that have been his rock bottom? I'm very hopeful it is.
Okay. Guys, that's what we call trauma. So, guys, it's just as much as their support groups for family. There comes a time when maybe a family needs individual therapy. And this is the kind of things I see in my private practice all the time. Because what you've been through is trauma. And that's not as easy to process and deal with in a group format just because of the nature of what you went through. And so, guys, there still comes a time when you need a therapist for you. or a therapist for the family. That's always an option. And right now, again, we're in a time where it's just available on so many levels, virtual and even in person. And so I just want to let you know, like, guys, sometimes we just got to step up and say, I got to go get individual therapy for me. It's our job to take care of the client. It's your job to take care of you. So please utilize the resources around you. If you have to go to church and ask for help, you get therapy there. If you have the insurance covers individual therapy as well. Mental health is a very, very important part of our communities and every family getting healthy moving forward. So please lean into individual therapy if you need it, because that's the kind of scenario where I would really encourage individual therapy.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. As far as that forgiveness piece, that's going to come in time, and goes back to that statement of watch his actions over and over. And consistent action will lead you to have a new perspective. And it's understandable that the things from the past will continue to affect you, but I definitely would encourage you to engage in your own therapy as well. And as far as our opinion on if he's hit rock bottom, it does sound, listen, reading this on paper, it sounds good. He went in on his own this time. It sounds like he hit a pretty far bottom this time, but it doesn't mean that you may not still have to jump in and display some boundaries at place. And do not give up, because I have seen people, like I said, I have seen people get sober on their, and I'm not exaggerating this number, 40th and 50th time in treatment, believe it or not. And these are people in their, 30s, even 20s, 50s, 60s, it doesn't matter. And the fact that they went in on their own is a really, really good sign. How do you encourage them to stay on the medication when they leave treatment? That's going to be tough for you to do now, because you can't control their behavior, and you're not a psychiatrist, so you recommending they take meds isn't gonna go too kindly to them typically. That would be a boundary that I would set in place, especially if you have leverage in the situation. Like if they're going to be living in your house, I would set that boundary of you have to remain on your medication. And if you don't, you can't be here. And I know that that's a tough one to place. That's a tough one to place, because it's very common for our clients to get out of treatment and stop taking the meds. Now, are the meds what made them better? No, they were just a piece of the puzzle. But we want to have a full puzzle here, right? We don't want to have a thing with all these missing pieces, right? Look at treatment as a whole. There's a community, there's medication, there's therapy, there's unity, right? And amongst many other things. And then we send them home. They've lost a few of those pieces, right? The medication's a piece of the puzzle, but for some clients, it's a very large piece of the puzzle. For some, it's not as large. But if we're dealing with something like bipolar disorder and it's a mood stabilizer, it's a pretty decent size of the puzzle. It's not the sole contributor, though. It's never just one thing. Any treatment of any mood disorder or thought disorder, medication and therapy combined is always going to be the best method.
We got a quick one over here about the disease model. You want to jump on that one?
Sure. Let's see where it is.
Right here.
Right here. Then my parents don't see addictions and alcoholism as a disease. They see it as being a drunk or a sin. Now, that is a tough situation, because the fact of the matter is, and this is actually coming more from a client perspective here rather than a family perspective on the other side of the coin. There's many family members, and maybe some of you that are logged in tonight have said before, why don't you just stop? And your loved one might say, well, you just don't understand. You don't get what I'm going through. It's not as easy as why don't you just stop, unfortunately. Because like I said, we have this brain that has been significantly impacted by drugs and alcohol. the way they think, the way they act, the way they perceive the world. It's all changed now. So when they stop, even if they were to stop, the pain just comes in full force right away. That's why treatment's helpful, because that person has constant therapy and interventions to help them. I encourage, all the families logged in here tonight to, I'm not telling you to believe I'm not asking you to believe it's a disease, right? That's the way that we view it. And it doesn't necessarily matter how you view it. Just understand that it's not as easy as just stopping. That, and it's coming from somebody that's been working in the industry 12 years. Carl's been in it 15. And if it was that easy, we wouldn't exist. And many treatment centers around the world wouldn't exist if it was as easy as just stopping. So I appreciate you saying that.
Let's piggyback quickly into medically assisted.
Yeah.
Great kind of transition.
So, and somebody mentioned the Vivitrol shot over here on the social media. MAT, medically assisted treatment. So this is going to be for the people that your loved one may be struggling with opiates or alcohol. Opiates most specifically, but also alcohol. So when it comes to it says MAT 101 on the social media thing here. So there's a couple different options here that I'm going to go through. You may have heard of Suboxone maintenance, and you may have heard of the Sublocade shot or the Vivitrol shot. Suboxone maintenance is a medication that has buprenorphine in it, which the easiest way to explain this is that it satisfies the part of the brain that craves opiates. It satisfies that part of the brain. So it's a medication that they take every day. Now, the difficult part about Suboxone maintenance, I'm not saying it's bad, but the difficult part is that they're still physically dependent on that medication. Even though, right, not to a level where they're going to die from withdrawals, but if they were to just stop taking it abruptly, they would experience withdrawals. Now, this is a harm reduction model that I want to say came out over 12, 15 years ago that was meant to be harm reduction. And that's really what it is. It's a harm reduction model.
Before that, it was methadone.
And before that, it was methadone, which that's something we'll never recommend or never put anybody on, because it's going to be even harder to get off that than heroin or fentanyl. Now, Suboxone maintenance, typically we're going to recommend a person's on that from anywhere from like 2 to 6 months. There's some people that might need to take it the rest of their life. Now, we don't just throw anybody on this. There's a process to it, and we want to make sure that the person's a good candidate. But the goal is to get off of it. The goal isn't to stay on it forever. The goal is to get off of it in a safe and structured setting. If a person is taking part in a full continuum of care, that allows them to do it. But Suboxone, what it's going to help a person do is really going to help a person deal with the cravings. The Sublocade shot is basically what I just described in a shot version. Most insurance companies cover this at full cost. The Sublocade shot lasts 30 days in a person's system and releases the buprenorphine slowly over a period of 30 days. They would get the shot every 30 days. Vivitrol. Vivitrol is on the opposite side of the scale. Vivitrol is actually an opiate receptor blocker. So this is also a shot that a person would get once every 30 days. And for opiates, if a person was to try to take opiates while on the Vivitrol shot, the opiates would not affect them. It would not get them high, but they could still overdose. In 12 years, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of people go on the Vivitrol shot. I've never seen a case, and I've seen a lot of overdoses, unfortunately. I've never seen a case of someone overdosing and dying while on the Vivitrol shot. I'm not saying that it hasn't happened in the world. I'm sure it has, because I'm sure there's plenty of people that try to beat the shot. There's no beating the shot. You don't beat the shot. Now, it's not a cure. It's not going to be like, okay, well, if you do the Vivitrol shot, you're definitely going to stay sober the rest of your life. The way I look at the Vivitrol shot is it's a commitment. It's a commitment to your recovery for 30 days. It's not the only reason. Like I said before, Medication is not the only reason someone stays sober. It's an assistance. That's why it's medically assisted treatment, right? It's just an assistance. Now, with alcohol, people can also get on the Vivitrol shot, and it helps out with alcohol cravings because it still attacks that same part of the brain. Now, with the and there's a pill version of the Vivitrol shot called naltrexone. That is something that we'll put somebody on if they're going to be taking the Vivitrol shot. We'll have them take that for a few days beforehand, so to make sure that they react well to this.
The goal is anything, any resource we can find that helps our clients be successful, we're all about. And I've seen tremendous success with MAT. But again, our goal is to help our clients be able to stand on their own 2 feet on their own one day. That's the goal. We're at 8 o'clock.
All right. So we are at 8 o'clock, but I'm going to ask that nobody posts any more questions just so that we can get through these. And if you're ready to ride this out with us, we got this.
Got this.
Referring to the number of times, average times a person returns to treatment before achieving success, a gentleman who owned rehab facilities and was actively involved with aftercare of federal prisoners explained that to be completely cleansed or detoxified, the person must be clean for 18 months. Only after this can the addict mentally process things clearly, at which time he begins to grow and mature. Only then the person can recognize that being sober is the only viable alternative. But prior to that, the addict is mentally maturity of about a 12-year-old. Does this make sense? I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself, to be honest. You're right. I don't want to put a number on it of 18 months, but I will say this, or 12 even. I want to say this, that it's like a person's brain isn't fully recovered from addiction or alcoholism for at least 3 months, in my opinion, just from what I've seen. Their brain's not fully recovered from addiction or alcoholism for at least 3 months. Now, many people live in the school of thought where they say at least, they're going to say it's not going to fully recover until about a year or even 2 years. Mm-hmm. So that 18 months, I agree with that, but that's not everybody. Every person is different. It's case by case. But when it comes down to it, like I said, you have these extremely minor mood-altering substances that a person abuses and takes over and over again. It changes the way their brain's wired. It changes the way they think, act, perceive the world. And it takes a while for those perceptions to change.
Yep.
It takes a while.
Come on.
All right. Someone said, I love it. We love you too. How do we help our loved one avoid toxic people that have enabled them in the past? Example, old friends that refuse to acknowledge that there is a problem and will push them to party with them.
Oof. You want that one?
Sure. That's a tough one. Because now
control
environment is such a key factor to people's recovery, in my opinion. And, I'm a big believer that if a person doesn't have to return home right away, if it's feasible for them to spend some time away, do it. Because sending them back home to an environment where there's the old friends and the enablers, that's really difficult because many of our clients struggle with fitting in, struggle with feeling a part of. You've heard the term FOMO, fear of missing out. They have a lot of that. So when they go home, if Carl's my best friend, my drinking buddy, and I go home and I see him, it's going to be really awkward to hang out with him unless we're drinking, to be honest. Now, can I go home and be around Carl and stay sober? Absolutely. But I need to have a lot of other supports in place. But if I go home and my only support system is the people I used to use with, I'm probably screwed, to be honest. That's just my opinion. And like I said, probably screwed. No guarantees. I try to not use absolutes. This is great information. Thank you for saying that. What about drug blocking shots? I believe we just covered that. I have been doing this all on my own also, and I think that was pertaining to one of the earlier questions. Now, that is a tough piece as well, is some of you might be the only person that is heavily involved in your loved one's care at this time, and maybe other family members have given up and just backed away. I understand that that's difficult at this time. Your loved one does need you, but but still have the practice of not doing too much.
Never give up.
Don't feel like you are in it so far alone where you need to throw on your cape and you need to go save them. They need to save themselves.
Yes.
They know you're there. They know you love them.
Come on.
You're able to love from a distance. I promise you that, folks. Okay. Do people get paid a stipend or get money for expenses while in rehab other than food stamps? Yeah, there's a lot of resources out there. It depends on the state that they're living in. There's resources out there for sober living. There's organizations out there. There's a great organization that's based in Texas that functions everywhere called Clean Cause. And they're actually a company that sells water bottles.
Yep.
And,
in Austin, Texas.
In Austin, Texas. And they use all of that money to help people get into sober living.
Yeah. Right.
So there are a lot of resources out there. And typically the facility is going to be aware of those resources. So if you want to help accessing those resources, just ask the facility and they should be aware of the resources that are in that state. And going back to the Vivitrol shot for a second, if their insurance doesn't cover it and they don't have any money, there is a Vivitrol assistance program that functions in all 50 states that will give a person 6 free shots in 1 year.
Nice.
We got to thank you so much. Thank you. Pleasure Unwoven can help increase understanding. Thank you, Anissa. Good big shout out to Anissa. She's actually one of our therapists in our virtual program. She does an amazing job, and great call out there. That's another film, Pleasure Unwoven. It is a very, very great description of how addiction and alcoholism impacts the brain.
Very, very long.
Pleasure Unwoven. It is a long one.
It's a great movie.
It doesn't have too much action, unfortunately, but very, very informative. All right. If the substance of choice is alcohol, in addition to removing all alcohol from the home, but all alcohol-related items should be removed from the home as well, correct? I.e. shot glasses, wine glasses. It wouldn't hurt. Absolutely. Now, is it absolutely necessary? No. But I would say that it's ideal if that stuff is not, right out in the open, because, when you look at that muscle memory aspect of things, the best example I could give you is think about if you, God forbid you have to go to the bathroom, right? And if I put you in a bathroom in front of a toilet, you'll barely be able to hold it, right? So take a person who's in early recovery, who's craving alcohol, and then I put him in a kitchen around a bunch of wine glasses, right? The craving gets even more intense because it's accessible. I could see it. I could almost taste it. That's my glass that I always used to use. It's on the top right of the shelf. It's still in the spot I left it before I went to treatment.
New Jersey Jets.
Yeah, exactly. That's my problem. I'm a Jets fan. So the Vivitrol really worked for my son. He had his longest time sober, 3 years when he took the shot.
Right on.
The Vivitrol shot, like I said, no cure, but I really view the Vivitrol shot as a commitment that people make. What is the pill or shot to reduce alcohol craving? That would be naltrexone and Vivitrol. There's also a couple other pill versions out there for alcohol. There's Antabuse, which is basically a pill that an alcoholic can take every day, which would actually, if they drank on this, they would get violently ill and throw up, and it would not be too pleasurable for them. I also view that as a commitment. Can you explain why you don't like methadone? It was prescribed to my son. Okay, so methadone, now, though it's going to do a very effective job with satisfying the urge to use, as far as a harm reduction model, it is actually very effective in stopping a person from using. The difficult piece with methadone is actually getting off of it.
It's very addictive.
Methadone, actually, the longer that you're on it, goes into your bones, and it takes the withdrawal process from methadone is typically about 30 days compared to the withdrawal process from like a normal opiate would be about 5 to 7 days. And this would be problems with sleep, irritability. So it's really more with the methadone. I'm talking more about coming off of it is the very difficult piece. Now, if it's done in a very structured setting with a good doctor who's not just leaving them on higher doses and just upping the dose, that's where you got to be careful at times, is the clinic that your son's potentially receiving it from, making sure and checking in with them, hey, like, what's your guys' plan for getting him off of this? So I would have that conversation with whoever's treating your loved one, is what's your team's plan to get him off of this? Okay. Is antabuse still an option for drinkers? I'm in long-term recovery and used it and firmly believe that it allowed me to really take recovery seriously. Yes, antabuse is still an option. I think I just said that. You probably typed it before I said it, but antabuse is still an option. And for alcoholics, and like I said earlier, it's a medication that if a person drank on it, they would actually become sick. So that gets us to the end of the questions. So I want to say this to everybody here. Working on your recovery from your loved one's addiction is now the process that needs to begin and continue. Right? It begun maybe the first time that you went to a therapy appointment or an Al-Anon meeting, or maybe when you jumped on this call 2 hours ago. Maybe that process began, and then maybe after you heard us say all these things, you thought, man, I got a lot of work to do. Or maybe you gave yourself a pat on the back, like, okay, I'm doing things right. Or maybe, you're shaking your head thinking, geez, I've been saying the wrong things. And don't beat yourself up, because maybe you were going into this without resources, without the correct knowledge and understanding of what you needed to do. I want you to now look at this as, I want you to take care of you. If you're taking care of you, your loved one has a better chance of staying sober, because part of taking care of you is making boundaries that protect you. If you're making boundaries that protect you and your sanity, your loved one actually has got a better chance of staying sober. Your loved one's got a better chance of respecting you through that process as well. So I just want to say that I really appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to be here with us. We are going to be doing this every 5 weeks. The next one, I actually had
closing thoughts.
Yep.
My closing thoughts is, guys, I know we've covered a lot of things education-wise, but I just want to let you know that we see miracles every day. I don't want anyone to get off this call and be hopeless or discouraged. I see miracles every day. I meet people out in the world that are living amazing sober lives. So just know the chances of them getting sober, staying sober, and being very happy can be just the most amazing. I love sobriety. I love what it's done for me. And I love working in this field, helping people become miracles. So please just know we believe in miracles. They're out there.
Absolutely.
So hang in there.
Absolutely. And, I don't know if I have too much left to say. I mean, I could talk a lot, guys. So, I will leave you on the thought of just thanking everybody for taking time out of your day to be here. You guys have the contact information for the facilities. You have my contact information from the original email. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to chat with you. If you want to run something by me personally, just reach out. Send me an email, shoot me a text. And I'm happy to talk about it with you and help out. We're all a team here at Recovery Unplugged, and we want to help each other out and do our best. So with all of that, I guess at this point we'll be signing off, and I'll let all of you be able to get some rest and take care of yourselves this evening. Thank you very much, everybody.